everyone, this is Soraya back with Purposeful Professional Media. Today's guest, Titilope Adedokun, is a tried and true role model for women, not just in Nigeria, but women everywhere. She is a lawyer, scholar, entrepreneur, and gender equity advocate who has a lot to say about the state of women's rights and gender equality around the world. Delve into this amazing conversation between Tita Lope and I as we discuss the realities of being a young woman in Nigeria versus the United States, the A Star effect and her outstanding impact on Afrobeats and the sexual expression of Nigerian women, and the patriarchy, Tita Lope's amazing story, and so much more. Tita Lope's story embodies what it means to be by women and for women as she gives ode to the amazing village of women who inspired her and discusses how she wants to be that woman for others. Let's get into this conversation. Okay, hey everybody, it is Soraya, the host of the Purposeful Professional, and I am back with another amazing Purposeful Professional. I met this young woman at the Vital Voices program virtually, but I could feel her energy through the screen. She is a fierce advocate for women. I think of the work that you're doing in Nigeria, it's just so amazing. And I know that so many people around the world are going to be inspired by it. So I'm super excited to introduce Titilope to our podcast guest. Titilope, introduce yourself.
Hi, Soraya. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to join the inspiring professionals you've had on the podcast. As Soraya said, my name is Titilope Adedokun. I'm from Nigeria. I almost said I'm from Lagos, but I'm not from Lagos, actually. I'm from a small town or city called Ibadan, actually the largest, I think, in West Africa. I always like to mention that. Um, that aside, I'm a lawyer. My background is in law. I'm a social impact professional. I'm a social entrepreneur and a content creator. I'm also the founder of Sisterhood HQ, which is a digital platform for Nigerian women where we are, empowering Nigerian women socio-economically. And we do this through inspiring stories because representation is super important. And you have to see people that look like you doing the things that you want to do so that you too, you know that you can actually do these things. And then we also do this through sharing opportunities and resources with Nigerian women for free. So we share things like jobs, scholarships, internships, programs, grants, and many more. But that's not all. We're also empowering Nigerian women with training and skill building, because it's one thing to say, okay, these are stories of women that look like you, or, these are amazing opportunities. But if you don't teach, people will say, if you don't teach someone how to fish, then you're not doing anything for them, right? So if you don't teach people how to actually take advantage of the opportunity, so whether it's how to, get the opportunity in first place, and even after you've gotten the opportunity, being able to teach them the skills to make sure that they maintain and optimize the opportunity. So at Sisterhood HQ, we're also investing in Nigerian women through skills training. So we've done various trainings on resume writing, on networking, on financial literacy, on entrepreneurship, just making sure that they have all the tools and the resources that they need to be the best that they can be. And I would say, like, one thing I always say is that, our X factor, or the thing about us, right, the unique thing about Sisterhood HQ is we're doing all of this in community. We make sure that every woman in our community, our digital community, feels like a sister, right? So you feel like you're part of this group of women who are cheering you on, rather, who are also going through similar things in life, and at the core share the same value, right? Which is making sure that we're all socially and economically empowered. So that's Sisterly HU in a nutshell. Outside of that, like I mentioned, I create content on social media. I love reading and I love good food.
That was the pitch. That was the pitch. I know what you said wasn't easy. I feel like you just got all the facts, and you know your organization so well that you were able to say that. And number one, amazing work you do with Sister HQ. Number two, you, like all the guests I've been interviewing, so multifaceted, able to find success in different areas, but also able to kind of connect, right? Connect different areas in the work that you do. I see the passion for the passion for law and justice in the desire to empower women, but also this passion for community, for growth, for helping other people to achieve the same success and the same opportunity, especially Nigerian women. So I think that's wonderful. And yeah, I'm excited to get into your story. As always, I love to get into people's stories. So I'm excited to get into your story. But first, we have a segment. an intern that worked with the podcast a long time ago decided to pitch this segment to me, and I really loved it. It's called Pop Purpose. So one thing we like to do is we like to talk about pop culture topics relevant to each guest. We don't just want to hear your stories, but I also think we can learn a lot from you, from your opinions as well, and your stances on different things. So I entitled this Pop Purpose, the Era Star Effect. And I think everyone has seen, the world is starting to see Ara Star, Tyla, Thames, Tiwa Savage. Like, we're starting to take note of the many talented women off from the continent of Africa. And there've always been talented women. If we can think of like Miriam Makeba, and we think of man, I forgot that woman that did the song with Davido, but she's a Nigerian artist. We can think of, we've seen so much, even from the men like Davido, Burna Boy, Wizkid. We're seeing that Africa has something to say, right, in terms of music, and has always had something to say. But I think there's a moment where, especially the women, we're seeing the women break through in a new way, across geographic boundaries, and social media, especially TikTok, is connecting Afrobeats to the world in a way that we've never seen before. So I knew, since you were a young Nigerian woman empowering other young women, I figured you'd have a lot to say on Ara Star's rise. To a certain degree, Tiwa Savage's, but Tiwa Savage is not as young. And yeah, I have a couple questions. So let's get into it. We have this Teen Vogue article that we're referencing. So Ara Star was on the July 2023 cover of Teen Vogue. And I want to open with a fun question when we start discussing her. Like, what is your favorite like Ara Star song, and why?
Oh, that's a good question. So one thing I just have to give a small disclaimer, which is I don't really, so in terms of music, I'm not necessarily the quintessential Afrobeat person. The other type of music that I listen to more than Afrobeat, I have to say that. However, I would say that, being more than music, Afrobeat is kind of like Nigerian culture. So for me, I would say that I listen more to gospel music, but I will tell you that they are amazing Afrobeat gospels. Like, I literally discovered a playlist recently. So Afrobeat is even more than the lyrics, it's more than the words, it's more than the musicians. It's really a very huge part of Nigerian and African culture, I would say. So even if it's not my go-to every day, I know I know about Afrobeat, and I'll still be able to share some things. So in terms of Ira Star, we love Ira Star in this house. We do, because she's very inspiring, and as you were saying, like it's really amazing to see a young woman that doesn't care about what anybody's going to say about her. And I wish more women were like that. Honestly, I wish more women were like, you can say what you want to say, but you cannot come and beat me, Sha, as Nigerians will say. Anyway, but in terms of one of my really good one of the songs of Ira Star that I like, I really like Rush. And one of the reasons why I actually like, so I would say that there's a bit of a story to it. So in 2022, I participated in this amazing program, the Fora Network for Change, the Global Summit. And, it was really amazing. I got to be in a space with, I think, about 20, we're 20 or 25. I can't remember. Sorry. We're about 20 something young people from across the entire, like, the world. We had people from Australia, people from Kenya, people from everywhere in the world, basically. And we came together for a week in Toronto, and we had like playlists, and one of the songs I actually like introduced to the group was Rush. And every time I think about Rush, and I remember one of my sisters loved the song so much that up to date it's still one of our favorite songs. So every time I think about Rush, beyond Ira Star being amazing and it's a really good song, I remember that moment in Toronto, being in a space where I was empowered by women, where I was seen by women, where it just felt like home. Like, and it's still home actually up till date. So yeah.
So I think Rush is how we were introduced to her in the US. Because if I'm not mistaken, Rush is the song that went viral on TikTok and Instagram Reels, and got everybody was kind of just dancing to it. There were a couple songs that popped at the same time, but I remember Rush being like one of those songs that really stood out. And the video was great. I mean, like, one thing, like, she follows up great music with great visuals. And a lot of artists don't do that, but the team was tight. That was there. So Rush was really, really popular. I can definitely see why that would be one of your favorite songs. And if I remember, she's speaking in Pidgin, which a lot of us Americans don't understand everything. But I remember she talks about like hustling. Like, there's a line about hustling. And I'm like, okay, like, she's a hustler. And I remember the album was 19 Dangerous. So I was like, okay, like, to be honest, when I first saw her, I was like, I'm not used to seeing as a woman of the diaspora, I was not used to seeing a Nigerian woman in this light. And we're gonna get kind of more into it because like just unapologetically dangerous, like 19 and dangerous, like just coming forward with that type of energy. And some people will tell me, like Nigerians I know will tell me, well, you better meet a Yoruba woman, you better meet a like they have that, and I'm like, well, we don't really know, we don't really understand y'all culture. So she introduced us to a different side of what we believe the continent to be and even African women to be. So I definitely see where Rush was that song for you. For me, I have a couple, to be honest.
Okay.
I hate that I have more than one.
Love it.
But I took a course called The Music of Africa, and we studied High Life, which is basically like the music of Ghana, which helped to birth Afrobeats in West Africa. And I remember thinking, I started looking at Afrobeats artists, and she came up. So I have a couple, but I would say my most recent one, I really love the Bad Vibes song, and I love how she's like rapping at the end.
Yeah.
We have to play in this.
I don't know Bad Vibes, sadly.
No,
but I'll check it out.
No, she starts like rapping at the end, and it's really great because it speaks about like one thing I noticed about Nigerian artists is that they will weave like spirituality into the songs. So one of the artists, it's not her, but he talks about like fasting and praying for like 7 days and nights, like really like looking to God for guidance. And I was like, there's so much going on in this song. There's like, I don't want the haters in my life, but then I want God's blessing and favor, but then I want like, to live my life and be myself. And I just really do like that song. That's one of my favorites, as well as Bloody Samaritan, the remix with Kelly Rowland. I love that. That is my song. So I think she has a unique way of coming forward, even though she's singing in pidgin and English, and she's switching, and even in the native dialect, she's switching a lot. But I think that people get the essence of the song. We hear these parts and we're like, okay, I resonate a lot. So Bloody Samaritan is mine. So I want to know, like, how has Nigeria responded to the rise of Ayra Starr, or to a certain extent, even Tiwa Savage? Like, has her popularity or has their popularity been received well?
Yeah. So I would say, like, it depends, right? So there's always like two angles to everything. There's two angles to it. On one hand, there are people like me who are like, yes, girl, like, I mean, this is 20. We should even have more. Can we have more women doing that? On the other hand, we have, people who are like a lot of times people tend to think, oh, why is a woman like doing that? Like, she should be in a husband's house. Or even, for example, one thing that they often do when it comes to women in the entertainment industry is that they often try to pit them against each other. So I remember when Ayra Starr first came out, there was lots of, conversations around about, Ayra Starr replacing Tiwa Savage, which is, so to me, I think it's laughable because you've had more male artists come out. Even we all know that, of course, the industry is more welcoming to men. They have more resources. Doesn't mean they are more talented, right? But they have more resources, they have more opportunities. So we can imagine that, men are entering and even excelling in the music industry more than women are. But one thing that we don't often see is that they do not pit them against each other in the same way they pit women against each other. But one thing I always love to see is that the women are beating their allegations and it's so beautiful to see, like, particularly when it comes to like I would say some of like the three biggest names right now. We have Thames, we have Tiwa Savage, we have Ayra Starr. And to see how they've kind of formed this community with themselves, it is amazing. Like the other day, Ayra Starr and Thames were like in a video and they were doing like this TikTok trend and the thing blew up, right? Because like constantly people had been comparing them. They would even say they look alike. Like, it was just really annoying. And I love that they don't care. They're like, talk, say anything you want to say. That's your business. And when it comes to collaboration, they will collaborate. The other day I was on, oh my God, I use TikTok a lot. Yeah. I was on TikTok the other day and I was watching a video where I think Tiwa Savage was attending, like, she was on a radio show in the UK and they were talking about like Ayra Starr and they showed a clip about Ayra Starr saying amazing things about Tiwa Savage. And Tiwa Savage was like, oh my gosh, she loves Ayra Starr. Like, she's such a talented, hardworking woman. And, and from what we see, like the love is mutual. And I love that every day. And, it's just, and I mean, beyond the music industry, there's always this rhetoric that, women hate women. And I would say that this perpetrated a lot in the music industry because it feels, oh, there's only space for one woman. So they always have to fight so that, it's the only one space that they give women. They have to fight for it. But I love that these women are beating the allegations every day with every move rather, while still being very talented, while still being very hardworking, while still being like really good at what they do. So it's so, so beautiful to see. And I'll probably round up with the fact that, I mean, I'm going off at a little bit of a tangent, right? But when it comes to that rhetoric that people are saying like women hate women, I feel like it's a tool of patriarchy to cause further divide amongst women because it's not true, right? We did a series at Sisterly HQ last year called Sisterly Love. So the idea was bringing, if you had like a female friend that you shared something like really good memories together, just come and talk about it. I think we featured 3 or 4 women and their friends. And at the end of the day, when you really think about it, right, for me, and I think for most Nigerian women I've interacted with and the women around me, and a lot of women in my community, I would say, when we think about the people who were there for us, the people who had our backs, and it's not even just about me. When I think about the generations of women who have gone ahead of me, like when my mom was like, trying to, take care of kids and have a career at the same time, when she needed somebody to come and like, just when the women in my life, right, and even I needed help, it was men that came through. So I feel like the whole women into men thing is not true at all. And there's this I don't want to say it's controversial, but there's this thing I always tend to say that if you say that women hate women, please, is it now men that love women? Because the statistics they're not matching up.
Ooh, ooh, ooh,
So yeah.
ooh. Yeah, no, you're speaking facts. You're speaking facts. I just want to quickly respond to what you said before we go on to the next question. So I'm not Nigerian, but when I see the 3 of them together, the collaborations and stuff, I'm like, okay, that's Thames, that's Iris Star. Like, okay, because we don't have to hate each other. We don't have to believe that there can only be one to succeed. We don't have to have a scarcity mindset and feel like somebody else's success and shine dims my own light. And I think it's such a great example, not just for Nigeria, but for the world, to see those 3 women support each other. Unfortunately, social media has done its dirt and they have seen a divide between them and a couple of the other African songstresses. Not going to name anybody. People know who I'm talking about. And I love her too. She's great. But it's this thing of, especially when it comes to trying to make it not only just within your country, but on the world stage, if she shines too much, it's a problem. So I'm glad that they have that space amongst themselves to do that amongst themselves because, like you said, the music industry, certain spaces are just inherently competitive. And when we get in there, we feel like we have to be the bull in the ring and I got to knock her out. I got to knock her out. I got to knock her out so I can take the spotlight. And that's just not necessarily the case. But I also understand what you talked about earlier when you referenced just honestly the patriarchy. Like in America, we like to say, oh my God, it's just the patriarchy. When you referenced these women almost being vilified for being free and people not understanding that and tradition seeking to quench that spirit that has made them who they are. And I think that there's such a great representation for individuality. And I could go on and on and on, even about how people reference Thames did a magazine cover a while back and they thought it was too sexy and they lost their mind. It's things like the policing of women's bodies or even women's sexual expression that are not just happening in Nigeria, but all over the world. But I think we could use what's happening with these artists as a great case study for bigger, broader issues. So thank you for shedding light on those things. Yeah. So we're going to go a bit deeper. Why do you think that the young women like Ara or those who like broadly and openly embrace their sexuality, like why do you think they face backlash in places like Nigeria?
Okay. So I would say that, like with a lot of, patriarchal and misogynistic cultures where like, again, like for Nigeria, like misogyny and patriarchy is ingrained into the fiber of the institutions of even what we call culture sometimes. I have to be honest, right? When you look at it that way, you think about the fact that you already have institutions. So whether it's culture, whether it's actually physical institutions that already like they have a status quo and it's to see things a certain way. And so when you are coming with a different mindset or you're coming with a different, viewpoint, there's already a problem. Even before you open your mouth, like there's already a problem. And I would say like with Nigeria, unfortunately, because again, culture, tradition, and I have to say, even though I'm very religious, religion too has always been one of the issues where there's a culture of shame, and there's a culture of there's a culture of shame. So when they see women like Arista, for example, just going back to like Arista will express herself and wear whatever she wants to wear. But some people will say, oh, it's not African or it's not Nigerian. Very odd because if you actually see some of the pictures of some of our forefathers and foremothers, they were wearing their short, iro and bubas, and nobody cared. Let's just put that out there. Or some people will say, oh, God said, or religious, whatever. But at the end of the day, I think it's all about choice, in my opinion. I think that's the core of feminism, right? That's the core of, in a way, like I would say, let's remove feminism now. I would say that that's the core of civilization, I would say, right? Like in Nigeria, there's a song that we have, or it's something that we used to say called Olajude. So Olajude is like civilization, like it's basically in Yoruba, it's like saying, oh, there's civilization or like there's new information. But I think at its core, right, that should be the core of it. I've said core a lot of times, but that should be that should be the core of it. Choice, right? Feminism is all about choice. So if you want to wear a short skirt like Arista, you should be able to wear a short skirt like Arista. If you want to be modest and be covered up, you should be able to do that as long as it is you making that choice for yourself. Because at the end of the day, when you think about things like the culture of shame, with Nigeria, or even like, take it a step further and think about purity culture, right? It's never stopped because some people will say, one thing about me is I'm not like, so one thing I made a post about it on LinkedIn last year about how I do not argue about feminism. I do not argue. That are some conversations I don't have just because I don't have the bandwidth and capacity to be, to make myself a slaughter, I don't know, lamb or something for people that just don't want to listen, I don't have those conversations. But at the end of the day, like when you really, really think about it, some people will say, oh, the reason why you shouldn't wear a short skirt like our style so that you don't get essayed, right? But are you now saying that, oh, if somebody is wearing a short skirt and they get essayed, it's their fault? It's not making sense. So it's very problematic actually. You see, most of the time, the reason why people are talking about don't wear this or that is because they're thinking, oh, if you wear this, it means you're a bad girl, or it means that you are, for example, in Nigeria, like it's not a joke, but there's a word called ashewo. So ashewo means prostitute. And it's a word that prostitute in Yoruba. And it's a word that every Nigerian woman has been called because you could literally be minding your business in the market. Oh my God, there's something that happens in Lagos markets where you're walking through the market. Men that are selling stuff will touch you and grab you. And like, don't touch me. And the next thing they're shouting Ashewo. So when you have an entire society that is built on men taking advantage of women, even in the small things, to see a woman wearing a short skirt for herself, not for you, because that's another thing. Men like when we do those things, when women do those things for them or for the male gaze, right? But when you see a woman doing it because she can, not because she's wearing it to please her husband, not because she's wearing it because, it's going to attract, she already has everything she wants in the world, right? Nobody cares. Like, she has his money, she has talent, she has faith. So she's not wearing it, she's wearing it because she wants to wear it. And they cannot fathom the fact that she is wearing it for herself. So that is the problem. So you see hypocrisy. You see, like at the end of the day, even this, like I mentioned, even the short skirt is really either associated with victim blaming or hypocrisy, as in that you're doing it for yourself. So a few weeks ago, Sisterhood History partnered with this amazing media publication in Nigeria. So they did this event called Attitude. It's the biggest women-only festival in Nigeria. So we're one of their media partners. It was really awesome, and I got to attend with a couple of people on my team. And I'm not really a party person. I'm not really a festival person, but it was so beautiful to be there. Just to be there in a space where like women could show up as authentically as they wanted, because there was no fear of being groups. Like I remember, like usually I don't really like lines and like I mean, I will always stay on a line. Let me say that. I'm like, I like queues, like stay on a queue. But I'll be honest and say that when I'm on a queue with men, and my heart's always in my chest because I know that someone could just grab me from the back or do like or touch me, in a very non-consensual way, right? But like I remember like being in front, I was in front of like the concert, and myself and my sister were dancing, myself and like my the other people on my team were dancing, like and we didn't care. Like I remember at some point, like every time we would do something that we would not be able to do if other people were there, we would say we would not be able to do this. So, like I was saying, my sister, I said, I would not even be able to be doing all this if there were men in this place because I would be so scared. Like, even down to little things, like, we're able to, like, I remember we dropped at, so, like, we're just right in front of the stage, and then there was, like, a space in between the stage and, like, the front, like, there was a mesh, like, a bar in front of, like, the people standing right in front of the stage, but there was a bit of a space. And so we put our drinks on just across. There were other people around. And I was telling my sister that, do you know that if there were men in this place, I'm not going to put my drink because I don't want to be, I don't want anybody to put anything in my drink. So, so it's just interesting to just see how, at the end of the day, just to just round up, it's just, first of all, like I mentioned, it's the society that we live in where like patriarchy is very much the norm. And then when they see women doing something in quote different, then it's a problem. But then at the end of the day, like I mentioned, I took it a step further by saying that, many men don't even mind, or people that will oppose what you wear, they don't even mind you wearing it for them. But at the point where you start to wear it for yourself, not for the male gaze, then you
Mm,
have a problem.
wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Ah, okay. I got lots to say. I was sitting and I was sitting, I was listening, I was just taking it in, I'm taking it in, taking it in. Okay. So I think what you're talking about in Nigeria is something that is also happens in westernized society in general. And one thing I noticed and I understand is Nigeria's colonization from the British also affected a lot of this dynamic as well, right? So it goes back to the Madonna horror complex, and not to get into the women's study literature, but basically the Madonna horror complex is like you're either a virgin pure woman, you reference purity culture and the religious influences involved in that, or you are a whore if you dress a certain way. You talked about the slur in Nigeria where women are called prostitutes for not responding positively to being groped, which is insane to me. Like nobody wants to be touched unnecessarily.
It's wild. You could just be existing, honestly, and like a man that just like you could just do the smallest thing. Like for example, do you know like one thing I've noticed recently is every time I go to the market and I'm just minding my business walking, a random man will just shout and tell me to smile. And I always shout back and be like,
Mm,
please don't tell me that
yeah.
what is that? Like me, one thing living in Lagos will make you very like expressive. Because sometimes I wasn't this expressive before I started living in Lagos. Oh my god. But it's so irritating because it just feel like women exist for them. So I have to smile because I don't know. I'm like, I don't know. They're my man.
Yeah, yeah.
Very irritating, trust me.
It's the same stuff. Like it's like if you don't smile, you're not friendly. And it goes back to a lot of what you talked about that I think is really insightful and I want to dig into. Like I want to dig into the fact that you referenced that it's almost like feminism isn't something that is to be argued about or debated about. And I think that that's an insightful point because I feel like a lot of women feel like even in women-centered spaces, this is the right way to be a woman. So if I consider myself an empowered, sexually liberated woman, I dress a certain way, I'm open about sex, I'm open about that. People, I'm shaming the woman who's modest. I'm shaming the woman who is not like me. And it's the same thing with the modest woman. If I'm a modest woman, religion or whatever, I'm just a conservative person by nature. I want to be that way. We're shaming women who are not like us. And I think that is the way how, we're pulling that patriarchy word, but that's the way that the patriarchy gets us because it's like, because I'm this type of woman, everyone should be like me. And if you're not like me, then that's a problem. Like I always say like a lot of us we would say like career driven. We like to do things, we like to be ambitious, whatever. we shouldn't shame the women who, I knew and I grew up with women who their primary goal in life was to be married and have a child. And that's a beautiful goal and something that is wonderful. And one of my favorite, I guess you could say feminist scholars, she spoke about the fact that femininity is expressed in different ways because women gain our self actualization in different ways. So depending on how you self actualize, your femininity will be expressed differently. Some women gain self actualization, and self actualization is like, how do we feel good about ourselves? How do we feel like perfect humans? Some women gain that through relationships, through being connected to a man. And we might say, that's crazy, that's great, but that's how some people operate. For other people, it's through being a mother, it's through having a child to care for, right? It unlocks a different side of them. For some other women, it's being goal oriented, driven, accomplishing your goals, right? Being intelligent, having intellect. And I'm going to share a link to her work. She's now passed. Her name was Aisha Faines, and she founded a company called Women Love Power. And she talked a lot about these forms of femininity, the different expressions of femininity. And I think until we as women begin to realize that there's no one right way to be a woman, feminism will stop becoming an argument. And it will more so become whatever type of woman you are, I'm going to support you. So I just wanted to throw that in there. Yeah.
So one thing I would just like add to it is that, sometimes I would say like context is very important, right? Because I feel like social media, there's just so much. There's just a lot, right? So I feel like at the end of the day, we should all be able to make very informed choices, and we should be able to make those choices from, our looking at like our situation. Like sometimes I'll have conversations with people and be like, like, I mean, like, I don't necessarily agree with it, but like, I get you. Like, I understand why you do the things that you do, right? It's like, I'm not necessarily like I may not necessarily do the same, but I 100% understand where you're coming from. So context is very important. And I feel like, sometimes with social media, I feel like, again, the issue, like you just rightly mentioned, is the fact that everybody always thinks, one choice is better than the other, particularly when it comes to discourse, as even like, for example, the way that people dress. And I don't think so. I feel like it boils down to what each of us is comfortable with, and again, like the why, or like the reason behind those choices. Because it's one thing and I have to make, and that's probably what I like, that's probably the main, like the point of what I'm trying to say, right? Because a lot of times we make choices thinking that they are choices, and I see that in a lot of women, but then we realize that they're not really our choices. They're the choices that society has told us that we should make, or the choices that we feel like are the right ones. Rather, because of certain circumstances. So again, I feel like it's not always like, it's not a, I don't want to use the word, but it's not really a black and white thing, right? But at the end of the day, it just boils down to making those choices for ourselves. And I have to say this too. I feel like, and then again, it depends on where you're coming from, right? Because there's lots of conversations these days about like, women, depending on like other people, like totally. And one thing myself and my like people that we have these conversations about, I always say like, even if you are not a woman, even if you're a man, even if you identify as another, like as something else, what we always say is that you should try to have your own. Right. You should never like nobody, and it's still the same discourse with like even so there's so I started like, so in Nigeria, there's always in Nigeria, like every market day on Twitter, there's always this argument about cooking in the morning as a woman, waking up at 4 a.m. And so what I used to call them, like what do I call? I think I call them kitchen warriors, because it makes no sense. Please, I don't even want to start talking about that. I call them kitchen warriors. But the point is that just make sure that whatever you're making choices, but you're also, Nigerians will say, you're also doing it with sense. Because at the end of the day, it is very risky, regardless of whether you're a woman or you're not. It's very risky to place your economic power in the hands of someone else. And unfortunately, a lot of us do that. So in as much as we're making those choices, we still need to look at the realities as well. Right. So there needs to be a balance. That's all I'll say.
Yeah, no, I know what you're talking about. I get that fully, and I understand exactly what you're trying to say, that like there also is this element of choice, and making sure that those choices come from a place of wholeness and not a place of lack. And I think that's something that I'm thinking about as well. Okay, yes, reminding me, we got to get that episode. We got to get that women centered episode and that Christian panel as well. I got like note to self because there's a couple things that I also want to share as well with the podcast listeners as well. So my last question for you on this section is like, what role do you think women like Ara Star will play in bringing Nigerian culture and also like Nigerian music to the world?
Honestly, like I would say, like I mentioned earlier, like music is a huge part of Nigerian culture. I one thing I always tell people, like one thing about me and Nigeria, like we're together forever, right? I will talk about, the amazing things about us as a people, as a country, but I'll also talk about the bad too, because no country is perfect, right? So when it comes to like Nigeria, as a country, we have a lot of challenges, lots of governments, lots of economic challenges. And at the end of the day, things like music are often what helps us to stay sane. Music and comedy, because Nigerians will be cracking jokes on the internet because that's our coping mechanism. Humor is always a coping mechanism. But that aside, it's always so beautiful to see, those like to see like because to us in a way like we see music, Nigerian music as kind of like an export for us. So it's a big part of our culture, but then it's even more than our culture, it's part of our economy, it's part of like what makes us us. So I would say like with musicians like Arista, it's so beautiful to see how they are able to, connect Nigeria to other people across the world, right? So I remember one of the first Nigerian songs that went viral was I think Love One TT by CK. Yeah, CK, and that was I don't want to sing it because I don't know. I don't know if that would go well, but I know everybody knows that. Like everybody knew, like that song was everywhere. Yes. Yes, and I think for the first time, everybody was starting to know, oh wow, Nigeria, right? So to really see people like Arista do that, CK, all of them do that so unapologetically, putting Nigeria like, in the faces of everybody, right, is really beautiful to see. And I'm really, really proud of them. And then it's not even just the musicians, right? One thing about Nigerians is Nigerians are excellent. And sometimes, one of the reasons why like we have all of that like audacity and stuff is when you look at all the issues that we have as a country. Sometimes the only thing you can do is just put your head up, work very hard, and hope that, whatever you do really works out for you. So it's just beautiful to see like the fruits of our labor basically actually manifest, honestly, because sometimes that's all we've got. Like I hate to say it that way, but really that's really sometimes that's really all that we've got. And one thing I've really loved about Nigerian music, it's really, helped us to really stop, put an end to those stereotypes, right? So many people may not have heard of Nigeria before they heard an Afrobeat song or so like an Afrobeat video on the internet, and they see, okay, all these things that are able to combat those stereotypes of Nigeria, of other African countries. So it's always super duper beautiful to see. And again, like I'll say the last thing I would mention is, regardless of whether you are an Afrobeat person, one thing Nigerian music does, or Afrobeat in general, and even African music, because South Africans be making some Amapiano bangers, right? There's just this joy and energy and vibrancy that it brings that I would say it's super reminiscent of us as a people. So Nigerians, right, Africans, were very energetic, very vibrant people. And so, our music is sharing that with the world, right? It's making everybody understand that it's not just about, no offense, we are the world, There's other things that, that there is to us besides all these stereotypes. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, amazing, amazing. Amazing, amazing. And I have to agree too. I think the music shares so much of the vibrancy of the whole entire African continent, and it's getting us to wake up. Because one thing I will say about the diaspora is so my family is Jamaican, but I am, I guess you could say, first generation American. So I was born in the US and I identify as both Jamaican American and African American. So growing up in all of that, made me realize that we have this disconnection with the diaspora. We do. And we have this disconnection with Africa, as well as I would say Africa doesn't connect with us either. So I think music is bridging the gaps that exist, the cultural gaps and the cultural divides. I always say being of Caribbean descent is very unique because not only have ties to the Caribbean and ties to America, but I also have ties through my ancestry to Africa. So I grew up being in everything, being a part of everything, and then also ties to like basically being in the Caribbean ties to like Afro Latino influences as well. So I grew up feeling like my identity was everything. So I'm so excited to learn about Africa and learn about like the whole diaspora as a whole. And I think music has really driven that, which is why I know so many African songs. I know that Tiwa Savage just released Water and Gary, the movie. Like I'm tapped in. I'm tapped in because to me, I know like we're just separated by land and sea, but we are the same people. And I love the fact that the music is bringing us together. So that's all I had to say. All right, let's get into who you are as a person because that was an episode in itself. Thank you for that. That was an insightful discussion. And we didn't even scratch the surface. I had to write down, get the self-esteem panel and Christian panel for the next season. Hopefully next season we'll have some panels and we'll bring some of you all back. Guests with, I guess I would say like related experiences can come and talk about these things too. So you're a fierce and fearless advocate for women. Like growing up in the patriarchal society you grew up in, like what were some of the things that you might have seen or heard that made you realize like, hey, women don't have the same rights or opportunities here?
Absolutely. So I would say like, so I remember like even in school, like you would hear things like, okay, so one thing I always like tell people is that, I'm very fortunate to have grown up in a household where like, I had sisters. I have two sisters, my mom, like it was a majority women household. So it wasn't as probably as bad as some other people would have had it because women were all that we got. So so there was that influence of women. So that's and let me say that's why representation is important, right? It's like, yeah, that's why representation is important. And that's why women should be in the spaces of power and should at least be 50% or over. I said that in all spaces. But the truth is, whenever I stepped out of the house, it wasn't the same, right? I remember hearing I was very little when I heard the phrase or is it phrase? I don't know. The sentence that women are to be seen and not to be heard. To be seen and not to be heard. Basically saying that women should look pretty, they should, and they shouldn't actually say anything. And sadly, I would say that unfortunately, in the Nigerian society growing up, women were not seen and women were not heard. So we didn't really see women in politics. Now, even up to date, Nigerian women still make, I think last time I checked, less than 3% of political, decision makers at all levels of government. So when you think about the presidency, the executive, think about the legislative, you think about even the judiciary, women still make very little of the people who actually are in seats. And unfortunately, these days you have organizations like Elect Her, some organizations are springing up in Nigeria to support women. But at the end of the day, it's still like we're making progress, but we're not making progress nearly as fast as we should. And it's still a very huge concern for Nigeria as a whole. So there was that growing up. There was the fact that, we couldn't, we're not even really seeing women on TV like that. Maybe we'll see one that's a newscaster, but that's just it. So we're not really seeing women in the media like that. We're not really seeing women taking up space of power in companies, in the school. Most people, your class teacher, except let me say that because to be fair, women still make up a lot in teaching. I have to say that. Maybe it's not really the same when it comes to teaching, but at least in most corporate spaces across Nigeria, we're not seeing women, really take the lead. And funny enough, one very interesting thing I like to mention. So most informal sectors or unfortunately, just like everywhere, most countries in the world, in Nigeria, there's some sectors that you find more women. Almost all sectors, women are not, there's less representation of women. But whether we like it or not, there are certain sectors where women will obviously be more. So in Nigeria, farming or smallholder farming is a very big, industry for most women, but it's part of the informal sector. So we have the most of the people who are smallholder farmers in Nigeria are actually women. Let me now say something. Even in those spaces where women make up the most, we still have men as the leaders and as the decision makers in those spaces, which is so ironic. So just growing up in Nigeria really set that tone for me. Just being not seeing women and not hearing women. And as I grew older, like I started to even see it more. Like for me personally, I didn't experience it, but then I heard people, I heard like a lot of women that are close to me have shared that, even when it came to becoming prefect or becoming captains in school, they're like, oh, women, you have to, or girls, yeah, the assistants, the head prefect is the boy, or some people say, oh, head boy is like the head, and then the head girl is like that. Like the whole thing was just a mess. Yeah, and unfortunately, I would say that even in Nigeria up till today, now it's better, but I would say but I'll still say that there's still a bit of it. There was this premium that was placed on no children. So you see a lot of people who, had only girls. You see them running up and down to have male children, because the whole thing is that who's going to carry on the name of your father or something. So, but I mean, again, we've made progress, not nearly as fast as I would like, but that was really the reality growing up.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, it's one of those things.
And like in the little event that you saw women occupying spaces, because the truth is, yes, we still, like, again, as I mentioned, like things are getting better, like little by little. But in the little spaces that you see women occupying spaces, the issue is that women are judged more harshly than men. And I do not like, and it makes no sense to me. Because we have, for example, Nigeria is always going to be my case study, right? Like we have many corrupt Nigerian male politicians, but literally their men will tell you that they are not going to vote for a woman because she's also going to, like, she's going to do this, she can't do that. I'm like, but you voted for the man that was useless. So don't come and tell me that they like to hold those women leaders, the little, like maybe the one woman leader that we finally saw after years, they will now hold her to a standard that they themselves can never meet, even if they tried. So it's just, so for all those women, it can even be a double-edged sword, because it's not only am I trying to do my work, I'm trying to prove to the entire world. It's just a lot. It's a lot.
Somebody said something and it was a tweet on Twitter and it said, if you want to understand Nigerian culture, just watch the Nollywood films and hear how the men talk to their wives. And there was a lot of conversation around that, because it's like, okay, all right, like we watch Nollywood, and I never really took notice of that. I'm like, oh yeah, there is something a bit different. I think what you're describing is, you effectively just describe what it looked like to you. Like you didn't see women in certain places. And even where women were in certain places, the men were in the positions of power. So it's reinforcing, like, the woman is, I don't want to say inferior, but we could say that's kind of what it's reinforcing. And then if you look at the Christian influence on Nigeria, I mean, there's also an Islamic influence, but I don't know about in Islam, but I know in Christianity, there's verses. People use verses out of context. There's a verse in the Bible that says the woman is the weaker vessel, right? And these things are used out of context. And I'm sure there might be something similar in the Quran, right? So if you think of the Islamic Christian influence as well on the government and the society, there's so many things that reinforce this thing of the woman not being able to lead and to essentially have power or even acquire power and still be seen as a respectable woman. So that goes back to something that we would call respectability politics. Like, oh, women, stay in your place. And you reference something that a lot of people say about women in, not even just in patriarchal societies, but women in general. Like, I want you to be seen. I want you to be cute. I want you to be, assisting someone. But I have a problem with you outside of that realm of where I feel I can control you. So there, you're touching on a lot of very deep things. And I want to sit with that. I want to sit with that for the listeners. Like, I want to sit with what you said, because I think sometimes when we're trying to gain empathy for other people, it can be really, really hard, especially in the cross-cultural context. But yes, listeners, I want us to sit with what was said for just a couple of seconds and understand. I can't even really empathize with what that must have been like. Because granted, the US is also bad. And you probably know that. Westernized society is also really bad. But I think at least the conversation was being had about, being a boss. And there were certain women who were just unapologetic about it. And they were pushing down barriers. They were breaking barriers. And that conversation was happening. So it just makes me more grateful for the work that you do, because if that's the context where you said even like being prefect or head boy or head girl in school, like it's almost like the man is still the dominant one. Like that's crazy to me, because it gave me flashbacks to when I was running for student government. And yes, even in America, I was always running against a guy. I was always running against a man we had the primary, and then I would always be me and a guy. And I think like I could only imagine, like, I wouldn't have even had the confidence to do that had I not seen women win in these positions. So I think, like you said, like representation and all these things matter. So I just want us to sit. I want us to sit with that, and I'm going to sit with that. Maybe for a while, and I might email you after this episode and be like, I sat with it, and here are my thoughts. But thank you for that. Thank you for sharing that. So you talked about representation, and I want to know for you, like, what did that representation look like for you? Like, if you had to name one woman growing up and you looked at her and said, like, I want to be her, like, who was that woman? And then why did she stand out to you in particular?
Oh my gosh, that's a really good question. Honestly, I would say that my sisters and my mom, they will always be, and even as I grow older, it's always the other women in my life. So friends come to mind, mentors come to mind. It's just always, and I mentioned this at the beginning, right? I've had amazing, supportive, men in my life. And I don't think I would admit that I've had like super supportive men in my life. I have mentors that are men. However, it's always been the women who have overwhelmingly, and even more of the women. I remember having a conversation with someone the other day about how, like, sometimes I don't even know, like, I'm so used to asking for help from women because that's just always been like, that's my default setting. I don't know. I'm just so used to having women in my life. But I literally grew up as the last daughter of three daughters. So like that has always been my default. And just, I mean, when I think about people who really shaped me, who made me believe that I could do whatever I could do, like I wanted to do. I think of my mom and my sisters. They've always been my biggest supporters. They've always been my biggest influences. I remember growing up, I wanted to do everything my sisters did. I remember when they cut their hair for secondary school. Then even I wanted to cut my hair, and I cut my hair for no reason. But I was like, my sisters are. I remember, starting secondary school, and they had already gone to the secondary school I was going to. So like I already kind of knew a lot of things. They already like put me through. So having sisters is such a hack, and I would say that has definitely been a blessing. That has definitely been a blessing in my life. I'm forever inspired by my mom. So my mom's an academic, and both of her work is actually in gender equality. And just to even see her, I remember then it wasn't easy. Again, just to even then if you saw like most women even working outside of the home, most of them were doing jobs like teaching, right? Because my mom works in education, because it was easier to balance in quotes, raising children and teaching is easier than other things. Trust me, even up till now, I've heard people say which is so odd. But then again, everybody, is allowed to make their choices. But I've heard people say, "Oh, women should do teaching because it allows them to have, chances to take care of their." But I feel like this 2024, like, shouldn't be like really. It shouldn't. Let's calm down. But then, like, just looking at like my mom and seeing how she was able to balance, raising three kids with a full-time teaching career, to see all the odds that she had to deal with as one of the few women in a male-dominated higher educational space, and all of the hurdles that she crossed before she got to where she got to, and even till date, all the hurdles that she still continues to cross because I mean, it's not my story to tell, but then you see so many things, right? It's so annoying because when you think that, like, as you advance in experience, as you advance in age, you think these things are going to get better. No, they become harder. Because now, before they didn't see you as a threat when you had 10 years of experience, but now that you have 30 years of experience, all of them see you as a threat, and so they start to act out, right? But then, like, just to see how she handles everything with so much grace, how I've seen like my sisters, break out of molds and, really pursue careers that were super different from, what they maybe studied or like what was the norm. One of my sisters, she's an entrepreneur. She makes wedding dresses, and Back then, sewing was a hobby. You didn't do like fashion design wasn't like what you did to, like, I don't know, to have a career. Like everybody was supposed to be a doctor, lawyer, or something. But to see how they're able to like break out of those molds and make a name for themselves and do like they're not perfect people, but even to see how like they've dealt with the mistakes and the challenges and are still dealing with all of them, to me it's always forever inspiring. And being able to have cheerleaders, I always have, like, I know that regardless of whatever happens in life, I just have these three women always rooting for me and always reminding me of who I am in the days where it gets really tough. And I also do the same for them. You always have to also be that person for your people as well. For me, it's everything. I feel like I've even gone off a tangent, but these women inspire me a whole lot. And like I mentioned at the beginning, outside of my family, even as I continue to grow older, it was my friends that would take. I remember those days when I had something, my friends would listen to me, go over my speech like 5 times. I had friends that I remember when I wanted to start applying to opportunities back in the day. I literally had my friends that sat me down. I can never forget. It was during the pandemic. They did a Zoom intervention for me and took my resume and literally destroyed it. But I'm grateful for it, right? It was women that did those things for me, to be honest. And I'm so grateful to them. But I'm also very proud of us and how far we've come.
Yeah, I think that's so powerful. I've been saying something that I think references you and summarizes your story a lot. I've been saying that I think we have the parents and even the family for our purpose. So one of the things that I believe, this podcast, these people on on this podcast know that I'm a Christian, so I begin spiritual sometimes. But one of the things that I believe is that God is so sovereign that he orchestrates literally every part of our lives and he designs every single part of our lives. And I think of when I think of the work that you're doing and even the woman that you are and the woman that you are continuing to evolve into, because we're always evolving and learning. I can think of I feel like your family makes so much sense. I feel like your family makes so much sense because it's like you were born, it's almost like you were destined for this path to trailblaze because you were born into a family that encouraged that, but you also saw that. And then I love how I want you to understand, like, it's so special that your upbringing was literally you being enclaved by women and supported and embraced by women because and you did talk about having male mentors and that role, but many of us didn't have that. I'm one of those women that has the opposite. That my life was literally the opposite. I didn't have the strong women support. I didn't have that. And I have a brother, so it's very, very different. And then I have an older sister, and my older sister has autism. So it was very, very a different dynamic that I was raised in. But I think it's so special that you were able to get that. You saw the power of women, like in your own childhood and upbringing. Because some of us are those women. At the beginning, you said some women say women hate women. I was that woman who said women hate women because that was my experience. That was my worldview of like not receiving much female support or even female camaraderie. So I think I love that for you that you had that because I think that set the tone and that set the standard for what you would become and the work that you would do because everything is intentional in our lives. And I think like I'm starting to realize everything is so interconnected. Our family, who our parents are, our upbringing. And I think it's wonderful that you got that purview of what Sisterly HQ could be, even before it became
Exactly, even
Sisterly
before it was
HQ.
a thing. Yeah. And one thing I would mention is, also like going, so again, like being in certain spaces. To be honest, I don't even know whether it was on purpose, right? But I guess like in Nigeria, like, they were like, so for a part of secondary school, I went to a girls only school, not for long anyway. So I feel like some of all those things shape you. And the fact that a lot of things in Nigeria, even when they are co-ed, they are actually grouped according to being girls or not, I guess. So yeah, so many things are like always, oh, girls class, boys. Yeah, sometimes it's not the best, to be honest. But what it could do, like the beautiful thing about it is that it could always lead. I remember like the first secondary school I went to, it was a girls only school. And again, just like a home, like who else is gonna do the work? Like who else is going to like do all those things that are deemed masculine if not for the girls? I remember then, like in the school, when they would have plays, it was girls that would play the male parts because who else is going to play it? I don't know. In those spaces, like it really just helps you a lot to just tune to the fact that, like women could be everything really.
Mm, yeah, no, I definitely I love that, and I can go into the tales of the co-ed experiences because I grew up in all co-ed schools, and the dynamic is so different because there's this element of competition, and you referenced it earlier. This element of competition when we as women get together, we compete, and then we also label other women. So it's like, okay, well, she's the pretty one, she's the smart one, she's the funny one, she's the skip school, doesn't want to go to college one. She's the class clown one. She's the social media influencer one. She's the popular one. Like, I think like my upbringing in New York, everybody was just kind of like marked and labeled. It kind of constricted us as to seeing each other in the fullness of like what you're talking about like how women can be anything. So like I said, I think it's so intentional and it shows that you got a purview of Sisterly HQ, what it could be mentally before it even became that. So thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing that. So I want to get into your career a little bit. So I know you originally wanted to pursue a career in law. Like, what was the process of like initially deciding to pursue this career in law like, and what drove you to like obtain your legal degree and start your career in the legal field?
Yeah, so I would say like so my journey with career transitions actually starts like I would say not a few years, actually a few years before that. So when I was actually in secondary school, so in Nigeria, for most secondary schools, when it's like time to go to senior school, although now I heard some schools are doing it differently, but back in the day, back in my day, I can't believe I'm saying that, right? But back in my day, what the norm was that when you were going to see, so in junior school, you take a couple of courses or classes. So basically, the idea was to just see what you were good at. So you do like sciences, you do social sciences, you just do all the subjects. So as someone who is in junior school, you could be doing something like you could do science at the same time you're doing fine arts, at the same time you're doing French, at the same time you're doing English, you're doing literature, you're doing all of this, subjects to just make sure that you have a feel for everything and you're able to determine which one is the best for you. But let's be honest, in Nigeria, what they really used to do was which one you ended up being good at, not really what you liked. Let's be real. So for me, I remember, finishing my sorry, they call it GS3. I'm trying to remember. I think in the US it would be like grade basically the class that you finish before you go to high school anyway. So I finished that class. And the question was, which class would you go to for senior school? So senior school is where you now like that's the point where it's getting real. So you have to choose what class you're going to go to. And most Nigerian schools, I would say that the science class. So that's if you want to be a doctor or you want to be an engineer or you just want to do the regular science, technology stuff, engineering, all of that. So arts is typically, most times they would group law with art because like arts, usually your background is literature and English, government, you're doing all those, things that will set you up for a career in law or journalism or political science or something like that. And then you have social sciences, which is more the finance. So people who are interested in business, finance, accounting, they go to social sciences or in some schools, they used to call it commercial science. And then, I remember one thing, my school was really fantastic. It wasn't like the best school, no, but it was, I would say that they really tried their best in terms of making sure that we were supported to make the right choices. So they had us do this survey where we had to like do like our things that we liked and the counselor would sit down with you because they didn't want us to make those choices blindly. They wanted us to actually talk to someone to make those choices. So I remember having a conversation with the counselor and she was like, oh, like your grades are great because usually they also Nigerians like to look at grades because they tend to think, oh, if you're really smart you can do anything you want to do, but if your grades aren't that great then they start to say, your grades aren't great so maybe you can't do sciences, right? They often would say sciences are reserved for the really smart people. So I remember I was having a conversation with the counselor and she was like, oh, you know what, your grades are good, like you could do anything you want to do, it's not about grades, right? But from everything that you filled out it seems like you're in tune with the social sciences. And I was like, what? Don't tell me that. I'm going to be the next neurosurgeon in Nigeria. And at the time, I know it's now that I'm an adult, I'm like, I'm not like controversial. But back then, I was reading the Think Big, all the Ben Cassim books. It was trending in school then. So I'm a very fast reader. So I'd read all those books in just three. So nobody could tell me anything. I was going to be the Nigerian Ben Cassie. So even though she told me, your interest, everything seems like should be, probably going towards a career in social science. I was like, no, heck no, you can't tell me that. And I went to the sciences, and I would say that there was a little bit of pressure as well, just from society and other factors. Because it was really like, because the rhetoric was like, you're very smart. It's like, why would you go and waste your brilliance in something that wasn't medicine or something that wasn't as prestigious as medicine? So I would say, like, with all of that together, I just decided to go to the science class. But at the end of the day, even while I was a science student, I was still taking courses, I was still taking subjects in art, I was still doing literature. I love my books. I was still doing literature in English, even though I didn't need to, because it wasn't a subject that like I would ever write an exam in if I didn't want to, right? It wasn't necessary to pursue any career path in the sciences. I really wanted to take literature in English. I was still taking literature in English. I still take economic because I'm like, I'm interested in that. I want to know how the economy runs. And I remember I would be in my literature and English class, and my teacher would come in and she'd be like, she would ask me a question, I would answer, and I was really good at writing essays back in the day. And all of that, my teachers, my English teacher, my literature and English teacher, in economics, when we'll be having arguments. Oh my god, we had a teacher that used to like, what's that word? He used to indulge us in arguments on like the economy and Nigerian politics. So by the time you put all of that, right, and like particularly my literature and English teacher, she would always look at me and say like, Adedokun, like usually they'll call you by your son. She said, Adedokun, like, that's why you're supposed to be here. And at some point I also started to ask myself what I wanted to do with my life. At that age, I was asking myself, do I really want to be doing this sciences of a thing? Like, do I really like it? Like, it's looking like it's not something I really want to do for the rest of my life. And so I made a choice, a very tough choice, to actually switch from sciences to the arts. I think in my last year, at the beginning of my last year of secondary school, so I basically had to finish 3 years of government in 1 year because in Nigeria, after you do like your senior secondary school, then you take an exam called JAM, or you take series of exams, but the major ones are JAM and WAEC. So JAM is like SAT. So that's what actually. So basically, that's like the one that like really determines whether or not you get into the university of your choice. So basically, you typically do like 4 courses that like are like that will determine the type of course you study. And then you do another thing called WAEC, which like basically you do all your subjects and then your cumulative scores will also add to your JAM score. And so, when it was time to make those decisions, I just told myself like I can't put myself in something that I know that I don't want to do. And so I remember going to my principal's office, talking to him about it. Thankfully, they were very supportive. We still had to convince certain people in my life, but thankfully we did that, and I'm so glad that I made that switch, because if I stayed, I would have probably been very miserable. And I don't know if discovering and being in my purpose right now would have happened. And a lot of times I tell people that law gave, like, now I'm a lawyer, but I'm not pursuing law, right? But I think I'm still glad I made that decision to switch at the beginning of my career. I remember, like, basically beginning of year, in secondary school rather. I remember even then, to be very honest, let me be honest, even then law wasn't even my first choice. I would just keep it at that, because when I liked when I was still a child, law wasn't even my first choice. But at the end of the day, the whole thing was, you're very smart, you should like do the best thing that the class had to offer. And again, like, but now that I come to think about it, I'm glad I did law, because law gave me international development, and international development gave me gender equality and social impact, which is what I do right now. So I wouldn't change my journey. I wouldn't change my journey at all. I think one thing that switching at such a young age did for me was I wasn't scared to pivot. So even when I was studying law, and I, as early as my third year, I knew that this law thing, maybe it's not my life. But from then I started to get a sense of the fact that I wasn't going to pursue law as a career. I wasn't scared, honestly, to make that choice. It doesn't mean that I've not been, trust me, I had a lot of fear around my career choices, but at least the fear to decide that, I'm going to switch and make transitions from one sector to another. Trust me, at least from when I made that choice in secondary school, I've not had that fear because I know I've done it before and I can do it again. And that's just it. So, yeah. So I'm grateful for my very zigzag journey.
Yeah, no, I think that's real. That's real. And it's funny because it's so funny that they make you all like choose a subject and commit to it throughout high school. I think in shoot, I think I'm not sure. I think in Jamaica the system might be very similar. I notice countries colonized by the British tend to have similar systems in terms of like education and the path from high school to college, secondary to college, university. So I think no, I think that's a very very insightful take. Many of us grew up being told you're smart, you should just be a doctor, or you speak well, you should be a lawyer, or you have a commanding presence, you should be a judge. Like we were told the same things over and over and over again, and similar to you, it was a mess. On the inside, it was a mess. Hence why this podcast exists, because I'm trying to get people to realize the people that y'all see that are successful, they have tried multiple things, they've dabbled with multiple things, and they make meaning out of it, which is how they're able to become successful. But I think it's funny that you reference something that I always say. I feel like people saw it in you before you saw it in yourself. So a lot of the time, like the adults in our lives, there's some that will tell us, "Oh, because I love you and I want to see you make money and I want to see you be successful. Be a doctor, become a doctor, like do it. You know, become a neurosurgeon." You talked about Ben Carson. He's such an inspiration. People look up to him. Like that's the things that we want for ourselves, and that's the things that many parents want for our children. But it's funny that you said a teacher saw it in you, because I feel like there's always that one person that's like the voice amongst the crowd that's like, okay, I think like I see that you can be this. And I got for me in my own personal life, when you talked about that, I was like, man, I can point to teacher who called things out in me that I didn't even see in myself years ago. And now that I'm walking in it, I'm like, wow, like they really saw it for me before I saw it for myself. So shout out to the teachers who do that, who see things in us before we see it in ourselves. And sometimes it's that one lone voice, because, like the road to success, I would always say, is paved with people who did the right thing. They went to the right schools, they had the right career, whatever. But there are people who see the like, no, like I see this advocate in you. I see this innovator in you. I see this creator, all the things you do, this content creator. I think people saw that in you, that you could be more than what was literally defined. And I'm grateful that you eventually got it, and like I said, I have this podcast because I try to convince myself that I'm not an alien and I'm not alone. I feel like I talk to the most like multifaceted people in the world, and we're blessed to have guests from all over the world and people who have made sense out of things that people would say like, "What do you mean you're quitting this job? You're quitting school? But you find your way. You eventually find your way." And I'm grateful all the time to hear those stories, because yeah, my story is very very similar. Of feeling like I had to go down one path. For me, I was on the business track. I have a whole story, and we're not going to get into it today, but I was on the business track to do traditional business, and that just didn't happen. And God steered me to what I'm doing today. So I think like when we get when we talk about these journeys and these stories, I was like, I can relate to Titilope because that's my story. And I feel like the guests can also relate because that might be their story. All right. So we are at time, because I want to be respectful for your time. I know you work for D Prize. So here's what I do. When I have guests who have, a lot of expression, a lot of talking, I give you the option to come back for a second episode, to book a part two. If you want the continuation, because we stopped at you becoming a lawyer. We didn't even get into Sisterhood HQ and all of that. So a couple people, I think I have 3 people this season who got a part two, just because some of you all are great at talking and I don't want to interrupt you. I just be sitting back and I take it all in.
Yeah.
But I do say, okay, if for those of y'all who are like that, we do need a part two if you want to get the more comprehensive story. And I think sometimes listeners like people coming back. Because it's like you give me a lot at one time, and then you give me. We tend to order the episodes, so they would. If you do come for a second part, it would be one after the other. Think about it. If you're interested, let me know. How has it been? Like, let's just take a break. And how has it been for you? Like, how has this process been for you?
It's been good. It's been a good process. I'm very happy that we like the electricity came because it just made me more comfortable. So I'm grateful to have had that. But I think I've really enjoyed the conversation so far. I think, I mean, we talked before, right? Before we scheduled the podcast. And I personally feel like this was like a continuation of that conversation that we had the other day.
Yeah, no, that was a great that was a great conversation. And I was like, man, so Vital Voices wouldn't let me come to DC. I'm actually going to DC later this year. Hopefully I'm gonna be in DC for like a couple months. And I was like, dang, like I missed you. I miss Carla. I miss some people that I was like, oh, I would have loved to meet in real life, but I know they have a capacity constraint, and I was like, I'm not gonna force my way. But I was like, man, because I heard so many great things about the Vital Voices retreat. I was like, okay, like it sounds like it was a really good time.
It was really, really, really cool. But like one thing I always say, like with like there's always going to be like other times I would say to meet and to like see, because it's so interesting to see. Like I've been part of like a couple of programs, and for me personally, just because like I live on this side of the world, it's not often that I will run into someone that I know, right? But one thing I would say is that like there's always chances to like meet people. While I was out in DC, I was in Maryland as well. I went to see a friend of mine who I hadn't seen since 2022 when we were together for the 4 Hour Global Network for Change Summit. So just being like, I literally hadn't seen her in 2 years. Like it was so beautiful to go. I literally went to her college. We did like a very funny TikTok dance that may never see in the light of day. Beautiful to see, right? It was so beautiful. And I think, those times always make it worth it. And, these days, right now, maybe not as much, but, if there's someone that you really want to connect with, I would encourage you to like reach out to them, have a call. It doesn't even have to be a formal, because sometimes I realize that, Zoom and Google Meet, particularly when it comes to catching up with people, can be a lot. So one thing I've like started to do, although now I'm not doing it so much because gosh, I feel like my cup is so empty and I'm just trying to like just be, yeah. But before, like I started to do like FaceTime calls with people. So I wasn't like I wasn't like it was like these days, the people that I really want to talk to, I keep telling them, like, don't like I just tell them, call me, like whenever, just call me. I will talk. Just call me.
Yeah,
It's 5 minutes, just call me. So yeah.
like it's so hard to balance like because everyone likes different things. Like there are people who try to people that I went to college with and they were like reaching out to me and I hit them with the calendar. And now I'm like, okay, that came across as kind of mean, but they didn't realize like that's how I operate these days. Like if it's not on the calendar, I'm gonna forget. It's not gonna happen. Like so I always tell people send me the calendar invite, but it's tough to gauge like what people like. Like I'm fast with responding to email, slow, fast responding to WhatsApp, slow with responding to text. So that's just my style. So people will get mad because they'll be like, "Did you see this text?" I'm like, "Yeah, I saw this text," but I tell iOS, "Do not disturb." I hate looking at text. So everybody has their different. Like I always say, if you want to reach me, you got to call me. And like Gen Z, we hate call. Like Gen Z, we hate call. We hate calling people. I don't know what it is. Like it's weird. I feel like I grew up. So I'm 23. I feel like we were the last group of kids to grow up sitting on the phone for hours because people don't call anymore. And I'd be like, oh well, why don't you call me? Oh, like all this weird shit. It's like okay, like you didn't call me anyway. I'd be like, you didn't call me. We didn't speak for years because you didn't call. We didn't make a commitment to reach out. And people also think social media liking is keeping in touch. No, it's not. It's keeping tabs, but it's not keeping in touch.
So I have a bit of like a different, just slightly different opinion to that. And the reason I say so is that, I've gone on social media sabbaticals a lot because of law school. There were times in my life I was just like, it's like I'm like I literally so I've deactivated I would say that I've deactivated my Instagram page for like a year or even almost 2 years before. Like, trust me, I've been on, and I would be honest and say that particularly for people that I meet abroad. So particularly for me, when I travel to all these conferences and things, and people that I meet abroad, I find that actually being connected with them on Instagram particularly like I remember like there was one program I was going to. So by the time so before the program, I was off Instagram. That was during law school. I wasn't using Instagram at all. My page was deactivated. You couldn't even tag me if you wanted to follow me. And I felt like, at that point, I felt like I wasn't as close to some of the girls than, then until like after the summit. Well, I mean, to be fair, there could be the fact that we already saw each other in person, though. But I would say that after the summit, just being connected on Instagram was super helpful to just like know that, oh, it's somebody's birthday today. Like I'm texting the person happy birthday, or just, oh, somebody graduated, or somebody went somewhere or had this achievement. Then we can comment on social media or something. So I mean, I definitely get how social media can be like a distance, like can make the distance. But I feel like in some way, depending on the context, for me personally, it has been very helpful in keeping in touch with people, particularly people like, in different time zones, in different countries. That's been very helpful for that.
Yeah, for me, my perspective is so different because so I went on a social media sabbatical for my God, like I could say years. Not from all social media, but from Instagram specifically. I haven't had an Instagram in 7 years because I shut down my old page. It just was too much. I found myself in high school getting into too much drama. And I shut it down. It was a lot of subliminals. It was before Instagram became like curated feed. So think like 7 years ago. Not even seven, it's before that, maybe like 2015, 8 years ago. We would post those like screenshots with the old like iPhone notes, stuff, throwing subliminals and stuff like that. And I was always a very sensitive young woman. So seeing that in real time was like, oh damn, like what's going on? Like somebody hates me, they're subbing me, whatever. So I couldn't like spiritually, mentally, emotionally, I was like, this is draining me. So I ended up coming off of there. And I never really had a need for an Instagram until I was like, okay, this is the major way that people see into your life. And I began realizing like, okay, now I want to go back to sharing. So I had my Instagram. I reactivated it maybe like in 2022, but I just posted something like the other day and I was like, oh, I forgot I had this. And so many people were like, wow, we haven't heard from you. But it's like, yeah, y'all haven't heard from me because y'all didn't reach out. But I think like when Instagram is such a purview into your life that I realized I'm like, okay, it's important to give people that access to me, even if I feel uncomfortable with it. It's important to show people how I live. So, because I've always been uncomfortable with social media, maybe because my early experiences of it being trauma inducing, draining, time sap. But as I become older and I'm like, okay, I want to build a brand, I want to get out there, I need to share more of myself, even if it makes me uncomfortable, because it does make me uncomfortable. I'm not a naturally like I'm not an oversharer, or I'm not somebody that really goes to share a lot. I tend to be more like I'm working on this, I'm doing that. Like people see me, but they don't really know me. And I was like, okay, I think I need to give people a chance to know me. So that's why I came back on Instagram. But it's not like I care about what people think. Hell no. And I don't answer my DMs either. I don't answer direct messages. I always say like, if you're gonna send me a DM, like call me. I'll be like, hey, call me. I don't like to talk in here. All right, everybody. I know you were super impressed by this conversation. Titilope is a legend in the making, and I'm honored to have this opportunity to interview her. It has been a pleasure watching her journey building Sisterly HQ and witnessing her amazing content creation skills through her LinkedIn presence. She is a marketer, advocate, content creator, but most importantly, she is a woman who unapologetically champions other women. This conversation was faith-filled, humorous, thought-provoking, and energetic. Thank you, Titilope, for being gracious and sharing your energy and your perspective. It was a wonderful opportunity. When I see Sisterly HQ impacting women across Nigeria and the world, I'm going to say, I told you so. I called it right here on this podcast. Anyway, yes, I called it right here on the Purposeful Professional, speaking things into existence as we always do. Anyway, this is Soraya, and we're out with the podcast for the people, your career, and the culture. Bye.